We're going to continue graphing sine and cosine. What we're going to do is we're going to add the amplitude, or our a value. What we did last time was we worked with the vertical translation. The vertical translation is our constant value. It's what we're adding or subtracting. That shifts the line either up or down. And our horizontal, the horizontal or the midline of the graph is the center of the graph. So if it shifts up, then it's no longer at 0, it's at 1. If it shifts down 2, then it's at -2. That's all based off of our constant value. That's what we did last time. Now, our amplitude is the absolute value of a. The a is the number in the front. That's what we're going to be multiplying sine or cosine by. That is either a vertical compression, meaning that if we have our normal sine curve, compression has the same form, but it doesn't go as high and as low. Versus if it's a stretch, then that means it's a higher peak and a lower valley. And that would be a stretch when our a value is greater than 1. So if we're looking at our example, what we're going to do is we're going to take our theta and y. We're going to use our same theta values, 0, pi halves, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Now, we have to remember our y values for sine. Our y values for sine are 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. This is going to help us find our y values, because when we find the sign of 0, what's happening is we're replacing the sign of 0 with 0, because the sign of 0 is 0. And then we subtract 1. So that means -1 is our first y value. Then we're going to find the sign of pi halves, which is 1. So now when we're plugging in a 1, 3 times 1 is 3, minus 1 gives us a 2. Pi, it goes back to 0. So when we plug in a 0, that would be 0 minus 1, which is -1. 3 pi over 2, the sign of it is -1, so this is -3 minus 1 is -4. And remember that 0 and 2 pi are the same thing, so we have -1. Now, when we're graphing this, we see that our maximum value is 2, our minimum value is -4. So we're going to plot our values, and we have 0, -1, pi halves is 2, pi is -1, 3 pi over 2 is -4, and what we have is 2 pi being -1. So when we're looking at our sine curve, notice that it's a little bit higher peak and valley because we're multiplying by 3. So just a couple things to notice. Our midline is at -1 because of the -1. And then from the midline to the peak is 3. To the valley is also 3, or we could think of as -3. Now, looking at letter B, we're going to do the same thing. We have our theta values, and we're going to find our y values. We're going to use our same 0, pi halves, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Now, remember the cosine values are 1, 0, -1, 0, and 1. We have those memorized, and we're going to be plugging those in. Remember, that's replacing the cosine of theta. When we plug in 0 into cosine, it becomes 1. So -1 plus 2 gives us 1. Then what we're going to do is we're going to plug in pi halves in for theta. Cosine of pi halves is 0. -0 plus 2 is 2. Then we're going to plug in pi, and that gives us a -1. Negative negative is a positive, so this is a 3. Then we plug in a 0, and we get 2. And remember, 0 and 2 pi are always the same. We're going to graph this just like the last one. Notice that our maximum value is 3. Our minimum value is 1. So we have 0, 1. We have pi halves 2. We have pi 3. We have 3 pi over 2, which is 1. Sorry, 2. And then what we have is 2 pi, which is 1. Now, if you're looking at the cosine curve, notice that it's inverted. The reason that it's inverted is because our cosine value is negative. So normally cosine starts at the top, goes down, and comes back up. This one's flipped around because of the negative. Notice that the midline, the middle of the graph, is at 2 because we have a positive 2 right there. Let's look at the last one. Once again, we're going to make our table. We have our normal 0, pi halves, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. We have our cosine values memorized, 1, 0, -1, 0, and 1. We're going to plug those values in. Now remember, when we're plugging them in for the cosine of theta. So when we plug in the 0 into cosine, we get 1. -3 times 1 is -3, minus 2 is -5. Then the cosine of pi halves is 0. -3 times 0 is 0, minus 2 is -2. Then the cosine of pi is -1. So -3 times -1 is 3, minus 2 is 1. Then we plug in the cosine of 3 pi over 2, which is 0. -3 times 0 is 0, minus 2 is -2. Sorry, -3 times 0 is 0, minus 2 is -2. Remember that 0 and 2 pi are always the same, so this is -5. Our maximum value is 1. Our minimum value is -5. So we have 0, -5. And we have pi halves and -2, pi and 1, 3 pi over 2 and -2, and 2 pi and -5. And that right there is our graph.